Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. My name is Kitty Mary and I want to share some times today where I fucked up. Or not fucked up per se, but I want to share experiences I've had that I've definitely learned from and mistakes I've made in the beginning of my sustainability journey, in the beginning of my zero waste journey. I hate calling it a journey, honestly, but it just describes the feeling very well now. I started zero waste in 2015 when I was 21 years old. And in about a week or so, I'm turning 28. So I've been in the game for a little while. And I kid myself with the notion that I've learned some things that other people might benefit from hearing about. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I have sort of 5 lessons, 5 mistakes I've made that I really want to talk about. And I really want to talk to you, especially if you're in the beginning of your zero waste journey or if you're in the beginning of any sustainability, low impact transformation. This is especially for you because I don't want you guys to make the same mistakes that I did, because it will just take you so much longer to get where you need to be or to be comfortable or happy in that lifestyle. It will possibly help you avoid burnout, etc. So let's get into it. The first mistake I made was that I always hyper-focused on the tiniest detail. And with zero waste as sort of my stepping stone into a more general low impact lifestyle and a more general sustainability awareness as well, there was a natural focus on the physical trash, because that was what zero waste was really about. When I started, I think I was one of the first people in Denmark to talk about zero waste, and internationally you could see people like Lauren Singer and Bea Johnson being really big, but there wasn't like a wide variety of people talking about zero waste. So you got this very small, narrow set of content creators talking about the same things, and that was not necessarily super helpful. I could see these content creators who were living vastly different lives from me, and who also, I can see now, had vastly different values from me, showing their trash in their little mason jar, trash from 3 years, 5 years, etc. of zero waste. And there was no one around to tell me or show me that not everyone can do that, that it takes very specific circumstances to be able to do that, and it is not at all something that everybody will succeed with. And the thing is, I created this very narrow scope of success for myself, where any accumulated trash that couldn't fit in this jar was a failure, in my opinion, in my eyes at this point in time. And that was really exhausting for a really long time. I remember once, I think I've told this story before, but I remember being at a restaurant, and it was always really important to me to not get any plastic straws, because plastic straws end up in the oceans where they become microplastic if they're not caught in the nose of a turtle first. It's awful. So I did my very best to not get any straws. But sometimes, because waiters are people, they would bring me one anyway, and I would go straight into a panic attack. I would be so anxious, and the mood of the entire evening was basically ruined. It sounds like I'm exaggerating. I am not, I promise you. There wasn't really anyone to tap me on the shoulder and tell me that straws actually only account for 0.025% of ocean pollution, whereas ghost gear left by the fishing industry is touching 40-ish% of plastic in our oceans today. So there's a big difference between how much energy you should put into different things. Today, obviously, I still don't use plastic straws, but if I get one anyway, even though I did everything I could to avoid it, I'm not gonna sweat it. I literally don't care. Like, that is not how I want to spend my energy. We don't have infinite amounts of energy, so we should use it in ways that benefits us. And completely hyper-focusing on these tiny small things is just not it. The second mistake that I made was buying all the fancy zero waste swaps. Let me preface this by saying that some swaps are really nice and practical and good and something I use every day, but they're not equally useful or necessary. And in many cases, we have a thing at home we can use instead, rather than going out and buying a new thing. And it is always more sustainable to use something you already have, even though it might not fit the zero waste aesthetic, rather than going out and buying a new thing that fits the zero waste aesthetic. That is just a completely backwards way of looking at it. And I often think about the fact that the zero waste fundamentals, the principles found within any sustainability movement, even the more modern ones. All these things about being mindful of resources, reusing, not letting anything go to waste, they all come from times of need or people literally not having a choice. A lot of the sustainability principles comes from marginalized communities, comes from people of color. So to me, it is almost hilarious how in modern zero waste, in modern sustainability, or at least in many movements of sustainability, there is a big focus on consumerism still. A different type and aesthetic of consumerism, but nonetheless still consumerism. There's just a car that's just going at it. I don't know what's happening. I don't know if you can hear this, but someone's trying to start their car. It's just not working. Bike to work, baby. It's not gonna happen. Today, I think it's so incredibly important to remind ourselves that sustainability, the main part of sustainability, happens completely outside of consumption. And while tons of sustainable products might be marketed to us, we can use some of them if we want to, but they're not essential. They're not your ticket into sustainability. It all happens outside of what we can buy. And that's something that is really easy to forget. Now, my third mistake sort of taps into the same problems, the same issues, but from a slightly different angle. And it was focusing way too much on the aesthetic. So when I started Zero Waste, it was just a fun month-long experiment. I wanted to see if I could not generate any waste for a month. Never looked back. I've told this story a million times. That was sort of how I changed my life. But gathering resources and researching about zero waste, I used Instagram and I used Google and I used Pinterest specifically. And I would see the same pictures over and over again. It was pictures of farmers market greens in nice tote bags. It was these light, beautiful, big kitchen pantries with completely similar jars everywhere, just perfect organization. You know the pictures, they're awfully beautiful, no shade. I've taken tons of these pictures myself. They can be really motivating if you haven't seen the alternatives. It's really nice and a visual way of being reminded that, oh, I can do things in a different way. However, sustainability is not an aesthetic. And I remember thinking that my partner's Tupperware containers didn't fit into my zero waste aesthetic, so we donated them because they were plastic. But now they're here and they're reusable. I could use them over and over again, and that would be perfect. Instead, I went out and bought new containers that looked more sustainable. Do you hear how absolutely ridiculous that is? This is no shade to people who like things looking a certain way. Obviously, we all have our styles. Clearly, I am an aesthetic person. I love things that are beautiful, but it's just so easy to lose track of what's actually the most sustainable and also the cheapest. Usually those two very often go hand in hand. It's just really easy to forget when we're told a different truth from marketing companies and from people who want to sell us things that we don't need to buy. So letting go of that idea of zero waste being a certain aesthetic is just incredibly important. Over the years, I've also seen, or people have tagged me in posts about how they are now transitioning into zero waste. And what they're doing is that they're taking products from the normal grocery store, normally wrapped in plastic, and putting them into the aesthetically pleasing containers. And that to me, again, this is not to shame a single individual who did this, but that to me is a sign that zero waste has been too focused on the aesthetic of what it looks like and not enough on how the result was achieved, how we got there. Because if you have a beautiful pantry because you only shop in bulk, then you need to focus more on the bulk shopping and not on the end result. And do you see where I'm coming from? Do you see where I'm going with this? We need to sort of let go and unlearn that sustainability has to look in a certain way, it has to be a certain aesthetic. It can literally look any way you want it to. If you're super punk or super goth, you can still be just as sustainable as someone who likes beige and green. Literally the same thing. Literally the same thing applies. It's not a style or aesthetic, and it took me ages to realize that. At this point in time, obviously, I'm still an aesthetic person that loves things looking a certain way, but I've also completely unsubscribed from the idea of the fact that they have to look a certain way. Like, they don't. Now at this point, I don't really care. I use glass jars I get from the supermarket instead of buying pretty jars, many of which often come from IKEA, which is not necessarily a sustainable company. I have a whole impact video about IKEA if you want to check that out as well. I reuse plastic bags that I am somehow handed in one way or another over and over again. We have these plastic gloves that we have to use in the supermarket if we want bulk bread, and we have to use the gloves obviously for safety. So we take those small plastic gloves and we use them to gather Molly's poop when we're out walking her. Like, that is also zero waste, that is also sustainable. It just isn't really Insta friendly, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't share them. Anyway, that's what I try to do with my weekly, daily vlogs, show you guys different ways of sustainability. So it's not all that curated feed, you know. But let me know how that works, or if you want more ugly sustainability from me. Number 4, and I might just ruffle some feathers now, but I had a big, strong focus on everything natural when I started my sustainability journey, because there's a lot of sustainability content that leans towards the idea that if it's natural, it's good for you and it's good for the planet. And while that is true sometimes, it's not a rule that can never be broken. There are plenty of things that are natural that are also incredibly damaging to the environment, especially if used in the wrong way. Cotton is a natural material, but the production of cotton is really unsustainable. I also have an impact video about cotton. Things aren't automatically good or sustainable just because they're natural. Many things that are natural are good and sustainable, just not all of them. And on the other hand, just because something is unnatural or synthetic doesn't mean that it's necessarily bad for the environment or bad for you even. One example being the technologies we're using and developing right now to lower the impact of different food products, substitute meats, plant-based foods, many of which are not natural, even though, like, I would argue no nugget-shaped thing is natural, but that's that. As such, there are many unnatural or synthetic inventions that can help us solve a lot of issues with climate change and a lot of issues that we're seeing today. So simply discarding them because they are not natural doesn't really reflect a balanced and nuanced understanding of sustainability, in my opinion. And lastly, and I feel like probably the most important one, because it took me a while to understand, because as I said, my start-off point in sustainability was zero waste, so there was this natural focus on waste. I don't know what this light bit is doing right now. I can't take it off. There was an automatic focus on the physical trash, and that's a really great way to start. A lot of people, when starting their sustainability journey, have this, well, where do I start? And that's a fair question. I've been asked this question literally a million times. And with zero waste, you know where to start. With your own bin, with your own waste. It's so physical and concrete, and it's really just a great starting point. But we also have to move from there. We have to keep going in a pace that works for you, in a pace that feels comfortable and good, and in a pace where you can thrive in it, obviously. No need to just push ourselves into learning and doing new things every single day. But once these things start to feel normal, once the normal waste prevention is working for you, start looking at the invisible impact. Because for the longest time, I didn't care at all about the waste or the trash or the impact that I couldn't see. I focused solely on the physical trash. Without assigning blame to other people than myself, obviously I'm responsible for the way I live my life. But as I said before, there wasn't a lot of different content creators. There were a very limited amount of people you could look up to in zero waste. And the people you could look up to often talked about the fact that they didn't look into emissions, or they didn't see a problem in eating meat or in flying, etc., because they chose to only focus on trash. And for me, that normalized that attitude. It normalized that you can call yourself an environmentalist and only focus on this tiny, tiny bit of environmentalism. And through a couple of years in this lifestyle, I've matured in it. I learned a lot about myself. I also realized that doesn't make any sense. That literally doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And especially if you're going to be a full-time content creator, especially if it's your job, it doesn't make any sense at all. When I started my zero waste journey, and a good while into it, I would still gladly fly on vacation, even though there were other options. I would get the ticket on my phone, so I didn't have to print anything because zero waste. I would also say no to snacks on the plane because zero waste. I would also gladly eat big steaks, but big steaks I bought at the butcher shop in my own containers to avoid packaging because zero waste. And that again did not give me a nuanced, balanced overview of sustainability. And the thing I talked about in the beginning about how you only have a finite amount of energy and you have to use that energy in the right places. And the packaging, when it comes to the impact of animal agriculture, is just a tiny, tiny little thing, and you would do so much more good skipping beef altogether. So it took me a good while to learn about these other invisible impacts and these other ways of being sustainable as well. At this point, I am still working with waste prevention. I'm still working with zero waste and trying to minimize my physical trash as much as possible. But again, if there is something I don't succeed in, I don't see it as a failure. I just see it as living life, because that's what it is. We're not in control 100% of the time anyway. So going for 100% zero waste simply is not going to work out for anyone. Like, it's just also low key. You didn't hear me say this, or no, you know what? You did hear me say this. The trash jar in itself is bullshit. I don't believe it. I don't believe it. You can't tell me that you are 100% in control all the time. The amount of times people have come to my place bringing trash and not taking it with them. Supposed to go in my jar? What am I supposed to do? It's a great way to get the attention of the wider media, of mainstream popular culture, etc., because it's so different. And it was also one of the things that drew me in. But as a way of living life, I just don't see it working out. I just don't. I just don't. Anyway, I still work with waste prevention. I still work with zero waste, minimizing my physical trash, alongside of also looking into green transportation, green energy, e-waste as well, secondhand electronics. I'm looking into the impact of my diet by going vegan. There's so many other things I'm doing, secondhand clothing. All of these things have really nothing to do with zero waste if we look at the zero waste principles, or how at least zero waste is often perceived. But nonetheless, it doesn't really make sense to not look into these things if we want to live a more sustainable life. It doesn't make sense to choose to only focus on 1% of the problem. It makes sense to do that in the beginning, but both in the long term and also if that's your job, I don't think it's a responsible course of action generally. And I guess that was my 5 mistakes, and also how I sort of learned from them and what I do now instead. Let me know if you've made any of these mistakes as well and how you solved them and how you learned from them. I would love to know. And if you have any questions about sustainability or zero waste or any kind of low impact living, feel free to ask the questions down below, but also check out all my other videos. Perhaps that's a little bit excessive. If you're curious about anything, I have my impact playlist that you can go check out with, I think there are like 40 videos or something on there. I've been super busy making those videos, but I hope they can give you that kind of overview that I'm talking about, that will make making decisions and choosing how to use your energy a lot easier. Thank you so much for watching. Have an amazing day, and I will see you guys next time. Take really good care of yourselves. Until then, bye. Thank you so much for watching this video, and also a special thank you to my Patreon supporters. You guys help me create green zero waste content, and I love you guys. You can find the links to my social media accounts down below and the link to my Patreon on this screen. Bye!